listened to speaker after speaker, I said, Mr. Chairman, what we need is a core of Africans that we're going to recruit, and we're going to call them African intellectual freedom fighters. The audience was startled. And the chairman said, I have never associated freedom fighting with intellectuals. You know, I want to leave you with something. What you say, think, or do comes from knowledge, experience, and mindset. And the mindset actually governs the two others. Governs your knowledge, shapes your experience. I have been all over the world, traveled to over 50 countries. I've worked in significant international institutions. So they've shaped what I know. I have experienced a lot. I was taught that knowledge without any ideological conviction is useless. That's the mindset. I have experienced where I thought we were doing serious developmental work on how Africa would develop. And a colleague reminded me that we were just making a living. I have seen knowledge manipulated to answer a certain question. So when I used that phrase, the African intellectual freedom fighters, I knew where I was going. Because I have had this series of experiences. And I know the importance of mindset, the importance of ideology in knowledge. But if we take a few steps back, if development is freedom from disease, freedom from hunger, freedom from tyranny, if development is about resolution of contradictions that exist in our society, you know, we have schooling without learning, we consume what we don't produce, we have jobbers without jobs. It means indeed, it is asking for a core of intellectuals, and these intellectuals are broadly defined. I'm not talking about someone with a PhD only. Yes, they will be useful, but I'm talking about all of us. Those of us that are concerned that we are not moving in the right direction. If development is about increasing participation of citizens in democracy, if democracy is about using knowledge to resolve our problems, then you need this core of individuals that I'm referring to. The intellectual freedom fighters. So, it behoves on us as agents of change in our various localities, in our various walks of play, place of work, to begin to imbibe a certain orientation. Because what is happening in the world is not as simple as we think. You know, I used to tell my colleagues that if Africa must develop, Africans themselves must generate the solutions. If Africa must develop, Africans themselves must be at the forefront of what will resolve these contradictions. Let's combine intellectuals with freedom fighters. Freedom fighters are fearless, bold, believe in themselves with the power of conviction. But what do we experience in the world? Or what have we seen in the world? Like I said, this concept came from experience. How come when I use this phrase in an international conference, I did not get people in that conference coming up to elaborate on this or even expressing support for this? The reason is clear. We have people with knowledge but do not have the power of conviction. We have people with ideas but cannot risk the next contract. We have people with developmental knowledge. We have people that have reached certain conclusions that contradict a certain mainstream idea, and they run away from that conclusion because it will affect the next job, the next promotion. So an intellectual freedom fighter is fearless, self-belief, has no self-doubt. And it's interesting that we're discussing this when there are a lot of young people, because it's very important. I remember going to London several years ago, and I was made a chairman of a function. We were going to discuss a new partnership for Africa's development. And there was a Sir David, Sir that, and I was made chairman, and I had to make a 15 minutes opening remarks. When I stood up to make my remarks, and I said, before we discuss the new, I wanted us to underscore what was wrong with the past. The old we must dissect for us to also inform the future. The audience kept quiet. Who is this African in the height of winter in London, where there were Canadian, British, Americans, and I was addressing them as if they didn't matter? The African intellectual freedom fighter will do that address without minding that there was somebody in the audience of significance. By the time I finished, because I was quite fearless, there was a Kenyan in the audience who said she was praying for me, who gave me the audacity to come to London to address. And by the way, I was a recipient. I had moved from being a donor to run an institution where I depended on donors to give me money. And here I am addressing them as if I didn't care. But I was speaking truth to power. I was telling them what was wrong with what they did. If we are going to discuss the new, please let's understand the past. So intellectual freedom fighters are those that are willing to stake several things in order to move the continent forward. Intellectual freedom fighters do not look back when they confront certain ideas that are said to be stylized, already taken for granted. They are known. They are not known. You know, knowledge is not value-free. Knowledge is not value-free. If knowledge was value-free, or is not value-free, how come we have conservative think tanks and liberal think tanks? If knowledge is knowledge, and it doesn't matter who generates it, it doesn't matter the institution where it is cooked, why would we label one conservative, another liberal? It means that ideology governs certain knowledge. And therefore what you are told depends on who is telling and from which institution it has emerged from. And so when you are told, the intellectual freedom fighter questions the background, the origin of that knowledge, and says, is this relevant for me? Does this apply in my situation? I am sure you guys know that we have received advice from international institutions, and they have retracted that advice after several years and seen that it didn't work. How come Africans did not interrogate that advice? How come we did not challenge that position? As a young man many years ago, I went to an African country to advise. And I met the minister, a fairly elderly person. And I said, Minister, I was working for an international institution that gives money. And I said, I'm willing to provide for you a small research setup so that when people fly in and tell you to do A, B, C, D, that it will result in X, Y, Z, that you yourself will have a basis, a position, knowledgeable position to challenge that prescription. The old man looked at me. Like I said, I was much younger. He said, young man, they have the money, they have the ideas, we must take both. Did you hear that? Yeah. They have the money and they have the ideas, and the money and the ideas are coupled. You can't take one and leave the other. I said, Mr. Minister, I hope you know that a doctor can also kill you. I hope you know. Yes. Yeah. Wrong prescription can kill a patient. But the guy was not moved by this argument. We simply want the money. And many of us have spoken against this, the decoupling of money and idea. Poverty does not mean poverty of the brain. And it leads me to the other point about centers of knowledge, where we create knowledge and how we use knowledge. I was visiting Harvard University and we're having a chat with a professor. We're having lunch actually. And he said something to the effect that they are inviting some people from the European countries to come and share some ideas. I said, Prof, do you know that what you are acknowledging is that knowledge can be created at different centers of the world? He said, no, I never thought of it that way. But that's what it is. We must understand that even in Enugu, you can generate a knowledge that will challenge worldview. We must understand that we must invest in things that resolve our issues. Part of the problems we have in the university, talking about these African intellectual freedom fighters, is that we have a certain perverse incentive. You have to publish papers that Europeans and Americans understand, even when they don't resolve our problems. You have to publish in certain journals that will make sense to them, even when they don't resolve our problems. So until you begin to have leadership that has that mindset that says, listen, I believe in myself, I know what I know, I also has a worldview that you guys should listen to. Returning to Aku Dinolo, you know, the Igbos have Njepo, success and discovery, or discovery and success. Igbos have Akonuche. It means knowledge and wisdom. Igbos have all manners of saying that relates to the issues that I'm addressing. How come those of us that are positive disruptors, if I may call it so, you know, we are positive disruptors as Igbos because you find people with elementary education dealing in highly technical industries. You have people that travel into a marsh land and transform it into an oasis of habitation. If you travel to Lagos and see what Igbos have done with the islands, with everywhere, you begin to understand that Ako Dinolo means it is not just about making money, just like it's not just about having knowledge. It is not just about experiencing. It's about having a mindset that tells you that in order to be whom you are, or who we are, or who we want to be, you need to bring a bit or all of what you're doing outside inside. It is a mindset. And I'm glad this conversation is taking place, because mindset orientation is not easy. Reorientation is not easy. We must, and the young ones who are really championing this disruption in a positive way are the ones we must reorient. To have the courage, the fearlessness, the boldness, to know what they know and to believe what they believe. First and foremost, you must be grounded in knowledge. You must know what your opponent knows and better, so that you are able to challenge certain world views that are taken for granted. So that you are able, if you are doing a Kuruno, you know, subsoil assets, mines, gold, oil, all these things we have, they don't develop people. What develops people is the mind, the knowledge. Many developed countries do not have natural resources. They don't. They simply have capable people, properly oriented, intellectual freedom fighters of their own, that are saying, you know, sometimes you wonder whether we would have done better if our education was in Igbo, in Yoruba, or in Hausa. Because our thinking is in those languages, but we are asked to express ourselves in English. And so there's a disjuncture there. But be that as it may, now that we know what we know, are we able to articulate what we know? Are we able to say, yes, I might not get the next promotion, but what you're doing is not right for us. What you're doing is wrong for this country. What you're doing will not take us to the next level. Until we get to that point where this mindset is crystallized, where we are all African intellectual freedom fighters. Until then, we are going to continue to struggle. Thank you very much.